Good evening, everyone. I'll just crack straight on with this script. Please can any members or officers in attendance with an electronic device mute it to avoid feedback. To guests attending remotely, hi Emma, via Teams, please could you keep your camera and microphone off unless you wish to speak, and ideally not use the camera at all, as this can affect the quality of the IT connection. Please be advised that this meeting may be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. In addition, the recording may be added to the Council website. If any councillors are accessing the meeting remotely, it is advised that you use your Swale or KCC laptop to participate. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. Please can members speak loudly and clearly into their microphones and switch their microphone off after speaking to enable remote participants to hear the next speaker. All good. Welcome everyone to the Environment Committee meeting, and welcome to any councillors and members of the public joining us remotely this evening, and our guest Lloyd Bowen, who is also in attendance. In addition to the members of the committee, we have the following officers in attendance with us this evening. Remotely, we have Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhoods, Emma Wiggins. To my left, we have Mid-Kent Environmental Health Manager, Tracy Beattie. And to her left, Acting Team Leader, Claire Lydon. Acting Team Leader of what? It just says Acting Team Leader.
The Environmental Protection Team.
Yeah. Acting Team Leader of Environmental Protection Team, Claire Lydon. To her left, Leisure and Technical Services Manager, Jay Jenkins. And to my right, at the back, Democratic Services, Philippa Davis. Please be advised that no fire drill is planned this evening. If the alarm sounds, those in attendance should leave via the exits indicated and assemble outside where directed. Do not use the lift. If anyone in attendance requires extra assistance, please make yourselves known so that we can assist you. Philippa, do we have any apologies for absence or substitutes this evening?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Ashley Wise, who is substituted by Councillor Hayden Braun, from Councillor Charles Gibson, who is substituted by Councillor Ben J. Martin, from Councillor Pete Neal, who is substituted by Councillor Mike Whiting, and from Councillor Mike Henderson, who is substituted by Councillor Hannah Perkin. Thank you.
Welcome, substitutes. Do members of the committee approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January 2024, minutes 5592565? Thank you. Oh, that was a... Okay.
It was a question.
Councillor Shield.
The minutes do state that we agreed as an Environment Committee not to print any more paper if we could, and yet we've probably spent £10 of the public's money on printing paper that will go straight in the bin after this committee.
I agree, and it's something that I noted as I came in this evening, and that's an oversight on my part not to have followed that up, and it's already in my diary to mail Philippa tomorrow to work out how best to do this. Just out of interest, could I have a show of hands as to how many people here this evening have picked up an agenda from the pile there? Okay, so what we ideally need to be doing is sending out a bold font reminder when the minute goes out, or when the agenda goes out by email, to remind people to either print or have a digital device with them, or to request one if they need one, but not to rely on the fact that there'll be a pile there at the front of the room. Thank you for pointing that out. And is everyone else happy with the minutes? I'm not saying you're not happy with the minutes, you're just raising that point. Great, we'll move on. Are there any declarations of interest relating to any items on the agenda?
I have
Councillor
a very
Braun.
personal interest in agenda item 7.
Okay. Noted. Anything else? Councillor Worcester.
It's probably nothing. I'd just like it to be noted that the Scrapsgate Field item sits within the parish that I sit as vice chair for. I know it's not my ward area and this is a SWAL asset, but I would still like it noted that that does affect another job of mine outside of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 5 then, which is a review of air quality management areas in East Street and Tenham. And for this, I will pass over initially to Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep my introduction brief because I'm sure that it will provoke discussion. Just to say that the top line is that it's good news that air quality is improving in Swale, and that this has been noted in our monitoring data in the ASR report for 2023. Specifically, it's good news for two air quality management areas, that is East Street, which is AQMA 3, and Tenham, which is AQMA 5, because we have noted that we have got improved air quality for the last 4 and 5 years respectively. East Street was declared for nitrogen dioxide in 2013, and Tenham was declared for nitrogen dioxide in 2015. We are following DEFRA guidance. We follow the air quality management system that the government have got in place. And the guidance states quite explicitly that where you have got compliance within AQMAs for over 3 years, you should start considering revocation. And where you have got data which is 5 years, you must revoke. To continue with AQMAs that are compliant, in DEFRA's opinion, weakens the air quality management system and the public confidence in that regime. Just to say that we will and we intend to continue monitoring in both AQMAs or after they have been revoked. And particularly in Tenham, we have introduced new mobile sensors which have been installed this week. This is introducing a new technology for monitoring both nitrogen dioxide and particulates. And this sensor is recognised by DEFRA. So should we note a reduction in air quality standards, then we can always take forward the action to sort of re-establish an air quality management area for any pollutant that's exceeding the standard. Our focus is going to be on implementing the actions that are in our air quality action plan, which came before this committee last year, and which has been recognised by DEFRA as an air quality action plan of good practice, and is up on their website as such now. So my thanks go to Claire for all the hard work that she has done on that point. But my recommendation in the report is that we revoke AQMA 3 and AQMA 5, and that we authorise the head of legal partnership to agree the wording and issue the revocation notices for that. Can I just ask Claire to sort of perhaps supplement anything I have said that she feels important for the committee's attention? Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. So we were, DEFRA did give us other recommendations. So if we were considering to review the AQMA, that we should consider doing a detailed assessment And that's something that we did pursue. It's something we didn't have to do, but we wanted to make sure that we can take into account additional development in the future. So we did complete a detailed assessment that took into account additional development going forwards. And that had also reassured us that we didn't see concentrations increase significantly to exceed in the future. So I hope that does reassure members. It reassures us that we are doing the right thing and that we should pursue revoking the AQMAs.
Councillor Jackson.
Or any statistics to show that the residents' health has improved during the course of this time, like less chest infections, etc.?
Thank you for your question, and it's something of interest to us. We don't have that evidence at the moment, but we have had approved some DEFRA funding for a project that works with healthcare practitioners and also working with those vulnerable groups to not just advise them on how they can protect themselves, but as part of that will be analysis into particular areas, not just health, but deprived areas where we see linkages with houses near roads and things like that. So it will be something that we could build on as part of that project. But we don't have that evidence as part of this report, but it's definitely on our mind and it's definitely something to consider. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and to the officers for this report. Since being implemented, the areas have clearly produced impressive results and also allowed us to demonstrate to our residents how much of a priority clean air is to this council. That being said, I do believe by leaving the areas in place indefinitely, it could possibly weaken their value, and as such, I do think they should now be withdrawn. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. First, it's about the cost implications. You say there's no cost implications identified for removing it. If at some point in the future it needed reinstating, would there be cost implications then?
No.
No. Okay. I am a little bit concerned because at the moment we're at the 4 years of having good readings, but there are an awful lot of quite high number developments that are on hold for things like the A249 to be completed. Spades can't go in the ground until that is finished. There are some big projects in the pipeline for the Tenham area that would cover that AQMA. I think it would be wise, in my personal opinion, to defer it for that year until we get to the 5 years where we must remove it, just purely to see what sort of impact all these larger developments have. I'm also concerned about how they can predict 10% below for 2028 when there is so much development in the pipeline. And I'm also concerned about the I wrote it down about the model domains that are used, because my personal example is in Newington. We've had a fairly large development go through on air quality equipment that was used because it was up to date and it was current, but it's actually 3 miles outside of Newington. We have got up-to-date and current AQMA equipment in Newington, but the facts and figures from that were not used. And of course, common ground was reached on figures that are not current for Newington, and I have concerns that using model domains will impact other areas across the borough. And that's just my findings at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can reply to those in part. So, in relation to the 5 years and different improvements to traffic works, what was included in the model in the detailed assessment is committed development and also development that was in the local plan, and we did get that from our planning department. So if there is non-committed development, it's something we can only work with what we have. So if there is development in the pipeline, that couldn't be included, but we are continuing to monitor there at, so you were originally talking about Tenham and East Street, but what we're doing is continue to monitor. So any of that development that does impact it will be picked up by us, and we have to report to DEFRA each year. So if there's an AQMA or not, we still need to report on the concentrations that we record on a monthly basis. And so having the AQMA there, it wouldn't make any difference to our reporting, because we are going to continue to report. And if we do see the concentrations increase, and if there are large developments coming in the pipeline, then they have to do an air quality assessment, and they would have to model their impact with the cumulative impact of other development on those monitoring sites that we have. So I'm trying to reassure you that those developments can't slip through the net if we remove the AQMA. So we wouldn't do a detailed assessment for the AQMA in a few years' time, just because the possibility of that. I think we have had to use the information we have at this time. But I hope that does reassure you. So the other point that you mentioned there about the model domains, so you mentioned about Newington. I would have to see the report to really know, but what developers and their air quality consultants should be doing is using monitored data for the area that's going to be impacted. So if it was on Newington, they should have used Newington monitored data. So it's sad to hear that I haven't seen that myself, but if that is the case, then that is not the way air quality assessment should be completed.
Councillor Bowen, would you like to... I've not had this situation. I've not had a visiting member before, but the general kind of rule that chairs of it kind of used at KCC when I've been a visiting member is to allow visiting members to speak once. Would you like to speak more than once now? Or would you like to speak once now, or once towards the end, or now?
I'll speak towards the end as almost a summary, if I may.
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Speed, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I don't agree that now is the time to revoke these AQMAs. The monitoring that's been carried out uses single dispersion tubes to measure nitrogen dioxide, which is the least accurate means of measurement. If you do use this method, the gold standard is to place multiple tubes at each site, and that's never been done. The monitoring has been based on annualisation of periodic deployment of diffusion tubes. Continuous analysers have not been used, so exceedances on one day or even during 1 hour are not being reported. So the monitoring is not typical of the way in which pollution is actually experienced. It looks at averages, not peaks and troughs. Everyone who lives along the A2 knows the impact when the M2 is blocked for hours and sometimes days due to construction work or accidents. The tubes haven't always been in the most representative places. For example, the one located outside the single-storey FJ Williams office in Tenham is not representative of the canyon effect of concentration and recirculation along the rest of Green Street. And as a result, this one showed an atypically low concentration, so was moved. But this reassignment of monitoring points every year questions the continuity of evidence that is required by DEFRA. Their advice is that annualisation requires the tubes to be in place for 9 out of 12 months to be valid. Now, we've observed regular absences and vandalism, which suggests that hasn't been the case, so it's questionable whether the evidence base is sufficient to meet DEFRA requirements. We have an air quality expert who lives in Tenham. and he conducted a citizen science project between February 2019 and December 2022. This was continuous monitoring and showed exceedances throughout the year, including 1 hourly and daily periods for nitrogen dioxide. For example, the air quality objective is 40 micrograms per cubic metre. This study showed average levels of up to 50 micrograms in the evening between 6 o'clock and 9 and 8 o'clock, and well above 40 in the 2-hour morning peak as well. This pattern of harm has been entirely missed by Swale Borough Council's single dispersion tubes at variable locations and heights. Now, I've looked at the DEFRA advice on how to revoke an AQMA. This states, and I quote, "Local authorities should be confident that the years counted towards full compliance are representative of typical conditions and therefore are in a position to assure local communities that achievement with objectives will be maintained after revocation as required by the Environment Act." DEFRA go on to say it's not advisable to base compliance on a year that's not representative of long-term trends. For example, compliance in 2020 is unlikely to be representative due to the impact of COVID and the lockdown measures. Similarly, in 2021, pollutant concentrations continue to be impacted by the change in typical activity. If you look at figure 2 in the report for Tenham, concentrations dropped significantly in 2020 and 2021, but in 2022 started rising again at all 3 sites. In East Street, one of the sites has increased over the past 2 years. So this is not a continuous downward trend. We also need to address the issue of traffic. The DEFRA advice makes clear that an AQMA should not be revoked where the council can reasonably foresee further traffic increases, and DEFRA actually gives as its example new housing developments. Green Street in Tenham is already experiencing increased traffic from existing approvals, and remember that every new house in rural parts of the southeast brings with it an extra 1.76 cars. Blossom Grove in Tenham was recently completed. That's a new estate of 130 homes. Spring Acres in nearby Batchild is now being occupied, another 580 homes. Approvals been given for 390 new homes in nearby Tong. Frognall Place in Tenham has outline approval for another 300 dwellings. And this includes a new roundabout on the A2, the layout of which will grant right-of-way to newly generated traffic over A2 traffic from the east. Inevitably, this will increase congestion and backing up of traffic into Green Street, especially during the 3 peak periods of greatest concern for daily pollution. Virtually all the traffic from this new housing ends up on the A2. If you're heading to Faversham, Canterbury or the coast, you drive right through AQMA 5. Towards Sittingbourne, you drive through AQMA 3. And this is only what's already been approved. What about Highstead Park? If that goes ahead, that's another 1,250 houses on the west side of Tenham, plus a further 7,150 houses south of the A2. Again, much of that traffic will end up in the AQMAs, yet the proposal is to revoke them. This just doesn't make sense to me. A Department for Transport traffic count in 2019 measured 14,001 vehicles per day through Tenham. A manual count in 2022 recorded 15,691. That's a 12% increase. This all illustrates how serious the traffic volumes are already and how much worse they're going to get in the foreknowledge of major housing developments between Sittingbourne and Ospringe. How can we possibly say with any degree of confidence that the level of nitrogen dioxide pollution will decrease in these AQMAs? In fact, the Ricardo report shows concentrations increasing by 2028 at every single receptor compared with the baseline of 2022. and at a level that is between 2 and 3 times higher than the limit recommended by the World Health Organization. And Ricardo modelling didn't even analyse some of the locations where nitrogen dioxide emissions are worst, according to modelling by Imperial College in London. We've had 2 years of traffic restrictions from COVID, which skews the data. There's no mention in the report of the regular diversions from the M2, which push traffic onto the A2. We've had the M2 Junction 5 and A249 upgrades, which have caused major disruptions along the A2. There's no mention of that impact in the Ricardo report. All data on pollution and traffic are speculative whilst these upgrades are ongoing, and we know it's going to get far worse due to the cumulative impacts of multiple developments. There's a vague reference in the report to predicted traffic from future development, but a complete lack of detail as to what they base this on. Ricardo relies on a linear relationship between A2 traffic speed and developments that are committed. They calculate traffic flows to reduce by 5 kilometres an hour, but don't apply queuing theory when Green Street frequently grinds to a halt, particularly in the 3 peak periods, bringing with it concentrated pollution events in real-world conditions. They ignore brick earth extractions east of Tenham, which are open-ended with no fixed timetable. And no account is taken of the impact on traffic and pollution of the local plan review. In my view, there is sufficient uncertainty on the scale and location of future development across Swale to make revocation premature. The DEFRA guidelines do state that council should take into account any local trends at either roadside or background locations and their expected effect on projected nitrogen dioxide levels. I believe this decision should be deferred until the local plan is adopted and the impact of congestion by new development is clear. And so I urge members to reject the officer's recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Speed. Okay, so I'll try and cover all those points, or most of those points, because there was a lot there. Okay, so in relation to the tube, you mentioned about tubes missing. We have the 2 tubes that were included in the report. There was 2 months that were missing from one tube site and then 1 month missing from another site. We have a template that DEFRA provides us to annualise that data, so we calculate taking into account any missing data, and yes, you're right, it's 70%. So the thing is, that is enough data for us and for this evidence, so I'm quite confident about that. In relation to you mentioned there about the peaks and the troughs. Well, that's why we have got the sensor now installed at Tenham, so we can take into account those peaks and troughs. I think I want to reassure you that revoking the AQMA will not make a difference to how we record data at Tenham. We will continue to monitor data as we are now with the AQMA. So I think that really needs to that message needs to come across, that if we are seeing exceedances in the future or when the local plan review is completed, then we would declare an AQMA on that basis of evidence. So I just want to reassure that, revoking an AQMA doesn't mean that you can't put it back there and you can't review the area and reinstate one. So I just, it just seems like that revoking it is the end all. It's not. It's something we are going to continue reviewing, and it is a sensitive area to us. And development going forwards will be taken into account, as I mentioned before, in their assessments, and also taken into account in the recordings that we have at the site. You mentioned there about the study that you had in relation to your colleague. I don't really know if that's MCerts, and I know that it's quite tricky to get those. Oh, so MCERTs is basically DEFRA-approved sensors, and so we have a recommendation on our sensor that is going through that approval process, so it's probably one of the best out there. And I'm not knocking the particular study that you had done, but I know that there's not many MCERTs low-cost sensors out there, so there is an element of uncertainty with everything, but with the specifically ones that aren't MCERT approved by DEFRA. In relation to the, you mentioned there about the DEFRA saying about the traffic levels in the models. Well, the detailed assessment used the data that was available from our planning departments and include what we have available for the development going forwards. And in relation to, you mentioned there about the Ricardo not mentioning the WHO guidelines, we really need to keep that in mind, that our statutory duty is to report to DEFRA with our ASRs and with the other studies that we do in line with their objectives and their levels. If we have in mind that we want to meet the WHO guidelines, but we have to report on the actual duty that we have. Government, basically the government standards that we have to report on. But yes, in our minds, we want to obviously aspire to those WHO guidelines. Do you have anything to add, Tracy?
Well, I'd just add that the AQMAs have been declared on the same basis of single dispersion tubes, and we are using the same science and the same sort of process of annualisation throughout the system. So you can compare one year to another, and that is the process of data monitoring that we adhere to. Thank you.
You can come back on that, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. In terms of the devices used for the Citizen Science project, these were flow devices. They do have an error margin of between 5 and 10%, but many exceedance measurements were so emphatic that that error margin is irrelevant. In terms of DEFRA guidelines, I would point out that they actually specifically advise avoidance of cycling between declaring, revoking and declaring again. And as I say, I feel we should wait until the local plan has been adopted so we know what the actual position is going to be on traffic, rather than waiting for that and then finding we have to reinstate it. On the point of WHO guidelines, I mean, the report seems to be saying, well, let's just keep within UK government official limits of 40 micrograms per cubic metre for nitrogen dioxide. The fact is the lower WHO thresholds are recognised by government. They're simply not applied yet. I mean, just to give you an example, there's an address in London Road, Tenham, where the reading for nitrogen dioxide is 29.98 micrograms per cubic metre. The recommended limit from the World Health Organization is 10. So that is treble. And exposure to 30 micrograms leads to an increased risk of disease-related mortality, inflammation of the airways, respiratory infections, allergies, and it also exacerbates the symptoms of people already suffering from lung or heart conditions. So why can't Swell Borough Council take a lead and work towards the WHO recommended exceedance limit of 10 micrograms in order to protect the health of our residents? Thank you, Chairman.
Claire.
Thanks, Councillor Sweed. Yeah, we've actually used some of those sensors before, and they're there are some errors with them. I know that there's obviously a small amount of errors that they report on, but actually we had some quite extraordinary exceedance of it, and it was very up and down. So my confidence in some of the smaller sensors and the flow sensors is not very high. That's why we did invest in quite a lot of money for this particular sensor we have recommended by Ricardo, and it's being approved by DEFRA. In relation to the UK government limits, we do, as I mentioned earlier, we do aspire to meet those limits, and revoking the AQMA doesn't affect our ambitions to meet those limits, but we have to report to DEFRA through the ASR on the data we collect, and we have to follow the template and report on their standards. Do you have anything to add, Tracy?
Did you have something that you wanted to specifically say in response to this?
Yes, please, Chair, if that's
okay. Go on.
So the recommendations on the report, the Environment Committee approves the recommendation of AQMA 3. It just seems a bit funny that, for instance, that we've got recommendations on a report. We are saying that some people are saying, well, we definitely want to keep them, but actually we don't want to keep to DEFRA are the people that are putting these data limits in and rules in, and yet somehow we're saying, well, actually that's not good enough. Well, that's what we've been doing. We have a working group, the Air Quality Action Plan Working Group, and that seems to be the place that, for instance, if we want to talk about future partnerships with people, that seems to be a good place to kind of look at that sort of work. But really, it's coming back to the recommendations that are on the report and saying, looking at the data that we've asked officers to do and collect, and DEFRA have set the limits for that data, we actually have to look at what's in front of us and make the decision based on the report that's in front of us. So if, for instance, as a committee or as a council, we then say, do you know what, we don't want to follow DEFRA anymore, we'd like to follow a different organisation's criteria, that isn't for this agenda item, is it? We're actually just looking at the rules that are in place at the moment and how we'd like to go forward with these particular recommendations. And my advice to members is to follow the data, not to follow the data that's potentially from another organisation that doesn't actually affect this decision, and also that perhaps attendance to the working group might be a way forward to look at some of the other issues that are being raised that are not particularly to do with these recommendations on this report. Thank you.
It's just a point that Councillor Speed does make some very valid points about the impact of air quality on health. We are very conscious of that, and in the beginning of every annual status report, we do emphasise the impact that air quality has on health and respiratory health in particular. But I do think that sort of improving air quality isn't about, the monitoring is one thing, it's one strand, and it's a very important strand of the air quality management regime within the UK. But we've also got the Air Quality Action Plan, and that is how we improve air quality. It is about trying to promote behaviour change. It is about trying to educate people. It is about trying to get modal shift and active travel. And that is not part of the report, as Councillor has mentioned. This is about sort of our compliance with our UK air quality management scheme as it stands at the moment. We can take sort of recommendations and reports about following sort of aspirational standards, and we are open to that. But at the moment, this is the sort of the tenet of the report. Thank you.
Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. It seems to me that the point that Councillor Speed raised about the inevitable impact of COVID restrictions on those years, because it will be 2020, but it will largely impact 2021 as well, where we had additional lockdowns. This is not something that only impacts Swale. Like everywhere in the country will have had a similar dip in NO2, I'd imagine. Do DEFRA or the Air Quality Management Scheme have any advice for rationalising the reductions over that period of time? Because I have some sympathy with Councillor Speed's point that actually that 4-year period, if we're looking at it as an average, that's kind of artificially reduced by the fact that no one was able to travel. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, it is a valid point. We did originally confront DEFRA about revoking the AQMAs because of that time period, specifically 2019 and 2020. If it was 3 years and we were looking at it like that, then they would accept it, but they didn't accept it because it is 5 years, and one of the years is within 10% of the air quality objective. So really, it's 5 years, and they felt like that it was not a good enough reason, because you have to take into account the time period. So it's only 2 years out of the 5 years. We have another AQMA St Paul's, and that's something we have to consider because it's only within that time period and an extra year. So we have confronted DEFRA about it, and obviously we do take that into account. But yeah.
Which is why we did an additional year.
Yes, that's why we did the additional year. So we did mention this in previous ASR. We did another year, and so now we need to, revoke.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a bit of sympathy for Councillor Speed on this one, having an AQMA in my own ward. And let's face it, the impacts of those 2 years will come through in the next couple of years, and I expect that one to be put forward probably next year with the words, can you revoke, possibly. Looking at Ospringe, maybe the year after. It was getting quite close. But we have to look at what's in front of us. Revoking the AQMA does not mean that we stop monitoring. It does not mean that we stop looking at car share schemes, encouraging people to walk and cycle, or stop sending out our enforcement officers to enforce the anti-idling rules, etc. All it means is it no longer has that definition. Now, that definition is set down by the government. The standards are set by the government. We'd all love to work to the World Health Organization standards. I'm certain of that. But that's not the standards that are set, and we're not in a position to say that is the standards that we will set. That is for government to do, and a braver government, I hope, will do. What it does affect if we fail to revoke is our ability to seek grant funding for air quality works from government that are based on having AQMAs which comply with their standards. That's something that we would have missed out on in 2023 had we had AQMAs that no longer complied. So actually, financial implication is if we don't do this, we lose the opportunity for grant funding in the future to do good works, to try and improve air quality. It's like if you have a flood warning. You don't leave the flood warning up when it is not going to flood. You have to take it off. We might not like it. We might believe, rightly so, that the air quality will continue to deteriorate, or will start to deteriorate again as we get future development. But right now the data doesn't show that. And certainly when you look at 2020 and 2021 being included in the stats, it does hurt. But we've already heard from the officers that actually DEFRA have bounced back on that one and said, well, no, because it's been over 5 years, not over 3. The officers have come forward with the right suggestion, with the right recommendations. They are the experts, we are not. We should listen to experts a lot more than we do.
Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is a difficult one, isn't it? Because what we're doing, we're ticking boxes that government say we should tick. And we put that in the sausage machine, and at the end of that, we come up with a solution that fits what the government would want us perhaps to do. But we've heard from Councillor Speed that the guidance is just that, and there are good reasons why we could ignore that guidance and take our own decision about whether we revoke or not without suffering without suffering any massive impact from government as a result of that. But while we're ticking the boxes and filling out the forms and reading the readings that we're taking, I think we are, and what Councillor Speed has pointed to, we are kind of ignoring the fact that the day-to-day lives and the health of people in these areas is being affected. The figures may show one thing. I think when we do that health work, which is going to come down the line, we might see a different picture and wish that we'd kept this ACMA in place. I do think that the forthcoming developments that are contained within the local plan, be they things like High Street Park or the area of opportunity around Tenham, for example, will have a negative impact on the air quality. And as has been pointed out, there is a cycle. I don't know what the length of time is between revoking and then reintroducing an ACMA, but it would seem the sensible suggestion to me is to do what has been suggested. I think Councillor Palmer referred to it, and certainly Councillor Speed did, which is to defer this until we've got better understanding, perhaps, of what the health impacts of this is on the populations that live nearby. We talk about what we're doing to minimise this, but actually when we talk on page 8 on 2.7, it talks about several factors combining to bring down none of those are attributed to work that Swale Borough Council has been doing. They're all national trends. The government and the EU set limits on what lorries could churn out, and so things improved. And people are moving towards EV and self-charging vehicles. There's nothing, I'd have liked to have seen something in that paragraph 2.7 that said what we've done here by introducing A, B or C as part of planning permissions, taking money off developers and spending it on something, has improved it, but none of that's in there. And it would have been nice to have seen it in there, Chairman, is all I'm saying. And finally, I mean, yes, officers do advise and members decide at the end of the day. And I think there's enough reason for us perhaps to defer this until we get that health data through, which may take a year, it may take 2 years. But meanwhile, there is that additional protection as a material planning consideration that an ACMA provides. And having it nearby is something that planners do have to, that developers do have to take more cognizance of when they're producing their own air quality assessments. And I know that our planning team are very hot on ensuring that they do just that. It would seem a shame to me at this stage to take that tool out of the planning department's armoury, and therefore I'll be voting against revocation, Chairman. But if there was a proposal to defer that until the other information on health comes through, then I'd certainly vote for that modification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to come back quickly on one point there about the lack of action from Swale listed in the agenda report here. There is a very disappointing outcome last year when I was trying to get some EV charging points installed in Tenham, and those of you who know the village hall know it's quite a large car park there, which has probably got plenty of space for a couple of charging points. And as far as I remember, the village hall committee voted against allowing a couple of charge points in that car park. So if the local members could have a word with the village hall committee, I would very much like to try and push that forward this year if that's possible. But I'll leave it at that for now and pass to Claire.
Thank you. I think you've definitely raised some valid points, but I think it's a different subject, as previously mentioned before. The things that you're talking about, the health impacts and the measures to improve air quality, that all links up with the Air Quality Action Plan and the project that we have. It's not anything really to do with revoking the AQMA, and it doesn't really have, as we've said before, removing the AQMA won't stop us doing any of that work. So I can't see a good reason to defer it, and I don't think it would. I don't think it would be the best option to refer it, but I can definitely understand your points, and the health impact is something that we need to review as part of the Air Quality Action Plan, and it is a priority for us.
Oh, could I just, I think that sort of looking at the health data is something that sits outside the remit of this authority. We would have to, and we do work with KCC Public Health in drawing down sort of information on the health impacts of air quality. But as yet, I don't think that they have got the resource or the organisation set up to gather that information.
It's gone off.
Our sound's gone off apparently for those viewing online.
Okay, I don't. Yeah, so I don't. So I think that's something we would have to sort of establish with KCC Public Health and see whether this was part of their priorities moving forward. So I don't want to sort of to promise something that we can't deliver at this particular moment in time. Okay.
Through you, Chair, if I may just very quickly come back, because I thought what one of the officers said in their introductions were, or in answer to a question, that the health work would be going ahead, and that would be happening. And now Ms Beattie is suggesting it's not. So
no, so as part of our DEFRA bid, it's a healthcare practitioners project. It's a toolkit, it's an online toolkit for doctors, and it's to engage with patients that have medical conditions where they're more vulnerable to air pollution, so it could be asthma and things like that. And it's basically to also link up with those particular patients about where they live, so if they live near a road, and providing advice for those people. As part of a research which Councillor Speed mentioned about the research to sort of see what the impact of people's health have been for the improvements. That is a little bit more trickier, and that is something we need to speak to KCC Public Health, and how would we get that data and how accurate would that data be, because it is over a short time span, but it is something we can look at with KCC. But again, they are the Public Health Department, so we have to work with them on that basis. Yeah.
So apologies for any inaccuracy. Yeah, it's a very complex subject.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think it was inaccuracy. It's just like you say, complex. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. As somebody who has very recently been diagnosed with late onset asthma caused by inflammation of the lungs, citing nitrous oxide as the pollutant, I'm very keen to protect people's health. And it worries me when I think I'm going to do an Angela Harrison now. I'm going to think back to a couple of years ago, sat over there as a visitor, when I heard an officer in here say that the need for housing was more important than residents' health. And that is recorded and it is written down. And statements like that really concern me. So that's something we can all think about. But the other thing that I'm looking at now is the part 2 of the recommendations. And I'm not happy that the Environment Committee authorised the Head of Legal Partnership to agree the wording and issues. I think it should at the very least be passed by our Chairman, Rich Lehman, for him to look at the wording of any documents that are approved or going to be approved, and if not, to come back to this committee to approve the wording on any authorisations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Thank you. It would be the chair of the Environment Committee that would be involved. That would be involved in the wording of the revocation. When we declared them, they also went through other head of Environment Committee or cabinet members. So I think it's just the legal team just process it for us, and obviously they would also review the sort of legal side of it. So.
Councillor Shield.
It's okay, I just wanted to raise the emblem.
Councillor Worcester.
Sorry, just on Councillor Palmer's point then, I do see this as a part 2, comes up on lots of different reports actually, that wording is there anything we can do around the wording for that then? Because I think she's right, that particular point you just made absolutely answers her question, but probably we could have avoided that question if it had been slightly worded differently on the recommendation on the report, because I think that would give me a lot of reassurance as well. I think that's a pretty good point to bring up. Thank you, Councillor Palmer.
Noted. I presume that there's a process that needs to go through to amend that recommendation. Is that?
Councillor Whiting.
Well, it's entirely in our gift, picking up what Councillor Worcester said, it's entirely in our gift, Chairman, to amend that wording. If you can accept an amendment on the night,
I'm happy to accept an amendment.
That we can.
I'm just conscious that some of the people in the room will be voting against whatever the amended version is, but we should amend it first so that people can at least be voting on the preferred wording.
I would propose, Chairman, with your permission, that we amend to agree the wording in consultation with the Chairman of the Environment Committee.
And issue revocation notices, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
I'll second that proposed amendment. I think we may as well go straight to a vote on that. Is everyone? Or do I? Yeah, we'd still have to vote on it, don't we? I'm deferring to Councillor Whiting on these points. Those in favour of amending point recommendation 2 per the wording suggested by Councillor Whiting? That appears to be unanimous. Thank you. Apologies, I'm a slow writer. And then, unless we've got no one else, I'm going to let Councillor Bowen give his summary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, there's a lot there. And then I'm speaking as obviously one of the ward members for Tenham Limited, so I admit I'm slightly biased. But I think if this was in anybody's ward, the feelings would be equally deeply felt. Just on one point, Mr. Chairman, regarding the Village Hall, I'm changing hats for a second. I'm the chairman of the Tenham Village Hall Management Committee, and the reason why the committee did not vote for the EV charging points is because the car park is for the sole use, repeat, sole use of the hirers of the hall, and the committee had questions and concerns that by putting EV points in a car park that's for the hall would then open it up to residents as a free-for-all and would cause potential problems for the residents in that local area, that is why they voted against it. It wasn't because they didn't want EV charging points, it was just that the hall is responsible for that car park, and the car park is for the hirers of the hall. I come back to put my other hat on as the ward member. Lots of points been made this evening, and I'm going to try and summarise in part. I have huge concerns about this. As has been alluded to and spoken about, within the ward of Tenham we have seen already developments in terms of the Blossom Grove estate, around about 200 houses there. We have had 380 on Springacre, 298 coming forward on Frognall Place. Great East Hall, about 300. Potentially Highstead Valley, 1,250 in Tenham, if that's agreed, 7,000 plus on the other aspects there. 130 in Blossom Grove, 10 on Linstead Lane, which could also be increasing to another 50. And that's in amongst several other potential developments which could easily be coming forward within the ward. So house building is a huge concern, and the roads do not change. They can't get any wider because you've got properties either side of it. one thing that hasn't been mentioned also that also will have an impact on this, KCC, for all the right reasons, and I fully support this, Tenham School is going to be doubled in size. Now, double in size, you can bet your bottom dollar it won't be double the number of people walking their children to the school. There's going to be a huge increase in terms of people jumping in their cars or vans or whatever to get people to school, and I understand that. But that is a consideration there. It is notable, and it has been mentioned already, that talking about COVID, we flatlined pretty much almost overnight. Lockdown went from very, very busy A2 to almost non-existent. And yet when the lockdowns have finished, we have already seen by the figures that the numbers may be under the average, but they are going up in that direction. You cannot ignore that because it is there in all the areas here. This is a consultation and not a consultation, sorry, this is a recommendation. You do not have to do this. It is within your gift as a committee if you decide to revoke this. It is a recommendation. Julian, Councillor Speed rather, mentioned about the other data that was taken. I know the person who collected this data, and I know his expertise in this particular field. I'm not dissing the officers at all on this. But my word, if there's anybody you need to know about on this particular subject, this is the gentleman who will be able to tell it to you. And I personally would believe every single piece that he comes out of his mouth. We know, it's already been said, that the data that we've collected as a council is flawed. It hasn't always worked. So if the data is flawed, then surely you need more data collected to be able to make an informed decision before making that decision that is based on actual proper evidence. So that comes into the area where I think it is not an unreasonable prospect to actually defer this, to make sure that we have all of the data, that this committee is then confident in its decision making. Because what we do not want to have, and I'm pulling on the heartstrings, we have a climate emergency plan declared here. That also includes health, as has been mentioned. I don't want to look in my residents' eyes and say this council added to poisoning you because we revoked the AQMA. Sorry, Councillor White, would you like to say something else? I'm speaking at this moment, so I don't need you to interject across the floor. Thank you very much. Respect. I do not want to poison my residents. I want their health to be as good as possible. And I do not think that by revoking the AQMAs in both these areas, and as has been said, potentially down the road other areas, is going to help achieve that at all. It was mentioned also about the, Councillor Martin's, flooding. You're absolutely right. When the flood warnings go, you pull back a bit. In this case, as I've outlined in terms of the number of developments, it may not be flooding, but the waters are rising very, very quickly. And we can't ignore that. And that's not just in Tenham and Linstead. This will have impact on all the wards around, including Faversham. So think about that, I would suggest. We really need to think long and hard on this. And if we have any doubt in terms of the data, whether we think it's not quite enough, then you have only one choice really to make, and that is to at least defer this until we have a better picture. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of those points, officers?
I think there's a lot of valid points you've put across there, but again, it is a summary of what we've already discussed, and we have sort of answered a lot of those questions. In relation to future development, that is something that will be reviewed as the local plan, and each development that comes forward has to do an air quality assessment, as I've previously said. The monitoring will continue, so having the AQMA still there will not make a big any difference to that. In relation to the COVID, yes, we are seeing a slight increase, but if we see a slight increase next year and the year after, and we have enough evidence to declare an AQMA, then we will. And I know that you mentioned, Councillor Speed mentioned about doing it in a cycle. Yes, we don't want to get in that cycle, but again, we have to have that evidence to declare an AQMA and also to revoke an AQMA. So in relation to, you mentioned about the data and that there could be some flaws in the data. Well, we did declare this AQMA on the same data process as what we are doing today. In relation to, you mentioned there about, and I have a feeling that some people have in mind that having an AQMA may be able to restrict development. This area will be classed as a sensitive area, either with or without the AQMA, and we will be putting in our action plan details about the area, and we will be monitoring it, so it won't be left alone and ignored. It will be just as important as it would be as declared as an AQMA. I just want to sort of reassure that I think there is that worry that the development is going to ignore this area and just think, oh yeah, we can develop more and we don't care as much. It is still a highly sensitive area to us, and we review all the air quality assessments that come through, and these big developments that come through in the future, they have to come through environmental health for our comments, and we will be pressing how important it is as a sensitive area with or without the AQMA. So I just wanted to sort of mention that.
Just very, very quick, and just on that, it does make a difference. I get your point in terms of the planning, but having an AQMA in terms of planning consideration makes a heck of a difference when you don't have one as well. That's my final bit, but thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to come back on a couple of things that you mentioned. Tenham School, my understanding is that Tenham School is being doubled in size because it doesn't currently have capacity for all of the children in Tenham. So for every child that will be driven to Tenham for the new larger capacity school, there will also be parents in Tenham who can walk their child to school in Tenham rather than driving them to Linstead or to another nearby primary school. And just on a slightly pedantic point, when you mentioned that the data was flawed because it was missing 2 months of information, it's incomplete data, not flawed data. Yes. Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, the data is flawed, but for the reasons that I outlined earlier. And all I wanted to say was, when we get to the vote, could I request a recorded vote, please? Because I think residents will be interested to know who's voted which way on this one.
Councillor Palmer.
Sorry to bring this up again. I don't trust the developers and the air quality things that they put in, because the developer put in an air quality monitoring thing for Newington, which went through the environment department in this building. Common ground was reached and it was withdrawn from the argument against the development for refusing it. And it went through anyway. So, and that was monitoring equipment for Newington that was in St Paul's, which is 3 miles away from Newington. Thank you.
Councillor Whiting.
I was going to second the motion for a recorded vote, Chair. Sorry.
Oh, I kind of already agreed to that. I didn't think it needed seconding.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good to clarify that, but I think it's not really much I can comment on that particular case. I think, you know, my focus is defending this particular proposal. So I don't really have anything to respond on that yet. unless you have additional details, but I
you,
don't know that
you say you're
specific case.
defending it because developers for future developments put in their air quality arguments, and they're not always accurate.
No, I agree. Yeah, yeah. There are cases where we have to review those applications, and I have asked for additional evidence and things like that. So I don't know the specific application you're talking about, but yes, at times we have asked for them to provide additional information to also increase the accuracy in their modelling and their future outputs.
So am I right in thinking, and I know that we've been over this like 3 times already, we're currently at year 4, and if the exceedance or the levels aren't exceeded next year, we would be compelled to revoke?
For Tenham, in Tenham we're a year 5, and East Street we're a year 4.
So technically we're already at the point.
Yeah.
Thank you. In that case, we'll go to the vote. I think there's... Oh, right, okay. I forgot that we had to do it by roll call. No, I'm going to... I guess it's just for 2 of us to tick off at the same time. Apologies, I've not done this before. As I was saying, I don't think there's any point in taking the 2 recommendations separately because they're pretty much in conjunction with each other. So the recommendations are that the Environment Committee approves the revocation of AQMA 3 and AQMA 5, and that the Environment Committee authorise the Head of Legal Partnership to agree, in conjunction with the Chair of the Environment Committee, the wording and issue revocation notices for AQMA 3 and AQMA 5. Councillor Roger Clark. Councillor Martin. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Perkin.
Against.
Councillor Jackson.
For.
Councillor Lehman, 4. Councillor Miller.
4.
Councillor Whiting.
Against.
Councillor Palmer.
Against.
Councillor Shield.
4.
Councillor Speed.
Against.
Councillor Paul Stephen.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Stephen.
Against.
Councillor Vals.
Against.
Councillor Braun.
4.
And Councillor Worcester.
4.
So that's against. So I make that 8 against and 7 for. So the recommendation is not carried. What happens now?
I would say we don't revoke, and we have to let DEFRA know of the decision, but really, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't catch you.
Oh, I was for. Councillor Palmer. Sorry, Councillor Palmer. Yeah, you were against, weren't you? We had conflicting things on our sheets. Thanks. We need. That's what I wasn't sure about. Do we need a counter? We need a counter recommendation. What would someone like to propose?
On a point of order, Chairman, why do we need a counter recommendation?
Well, that's what I thought too.
We've just refused it. That's the end of it, isn't it?
Yep. Emma Wiggins.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, an interesting discussion. So thank you for that. And I would agree with Councillor Whiting here. The recommendation was put, it's been voted and the recommendation has fallen. So the question now is for us as officers to go back to DEFRA to relay that message, and we will work to see what the outcome of that is. But it's very clear that the vote's been taken and the recommendation falls, so there should not really be a counter recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you, officers. Call this meeting to order again. Agenda item 6, Scrapsgate Field in Minster, horse riding field review. And Jay is going to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Scrapsgate Field in Minster horse riding review is in front of you this evening with one recommendation, which is that the adjusted grounds maintenance arrangements continue with the additional cutting of a former rough grass area, and this is at no additional cost to the council. The use of Scrapsgate Field for a dedicated horse riding area was raised in September 22 at the Sheppey Area Committee and subsequently debated at this committee in March of 23. It was agreed that the grass cutting for that horse riding area be undertaken with no additional costs, and this would be achieved by reducing the maintenance elsewhere on the site, and that a review would be taken after a year to ensure that the operation had succeeded and consider any health and safety issues that may have arisen during that 12 months. Scrapsgate Field is an open space located at the west of Scrapsgate Road in Minster. It is part of a local wildlife site, has a small car park, large grass area, and a small amount of tree planting, and also contains an environmental agency drain, Scrapsgate drain. The plan of the site is included at Appendix 1 for your information. The request to the area committee arose from an informal local riding group, and they were identifying concerns about training horses on uneven and uncut rough ground. There was a request for an all-weather training arena. The compromise was agreed to, as I've mentioned, to cut the rough grass area, and that's marked in red on the plan attached to Appendix 1. We have changed the signage at the venue, and we've recently refreshed all of those signs so that we've raised the awareness that horses are in that vicinity. And we've also suggested that we continue with the adjusted grounds maintenance arrangements to ensure that that facility can be maintained. There are a couple of alternative options. Could return the additional area back to rough grass, but this would potentially prevent use by horses. And the second alternative which has previously come to this committee, was to put in a horse menage with appropriate surfacing, but this would have cost in the region of £15,000 to £20,000, and therefore was felt impractical at the time. I'll pause there for any questions.
Councillor Jackson.
Yes, I'm quite disappointed to see that the people the local horse riding group who originally raised the issue haven't communicated. It says that they've been unsuccessful trying to communicate with the local horse riding group. Do we know why, as they raised it?
I'll have to refer an answer to that from my colleague, Green Spaces Manager, who's liaising with them. We have made a number of attempts, as I understand it, and as yet we've not had a response.
Councillor Worcester.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that actually the area that you're talking about is surrounded by stables? So, for instance, I think it's quite an important point to make that when you talk about a horse riding group, when I was at the area meeting where this was first proposed, it could have been maybe misunderstood that, for instance, there's a massive club where all horse riders get together. That is not the case. The playing field is surrounded by stables where, for instance, you may go along and house your horse, but it's a private ground which is owned, and obviously the nature of horse riding is that people lease horses for that. So the attendance at that ground, I think, is excellent for what it's being intended for, and also does support the culture that Minster has, and as a population are very proud of having horses accepted as part of our local way of life, if that makes sense. And at a very recent appeal for a piece of land that was in Minster, it was accepted by the person in charge of the appeal that the use of land for horses was a major part of life in that area. So I'm very pleased to see that this has come forward through the area committee route, and I think from personal knowledge that this will be well used and a very good plan that doesn't affect our budget position. So I will be supporting this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments? Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? It states in point 6 in the implications that the risk assessments for the site will detail steps taken to weigh up the different needs of user groups, so dogs versus horses. We've seen quite a lot recently of, like, in the media about run-ins between dog walkers and horse riding. Just putting on the record that I'm not a fan of horse riding anyway. But has there been, like, beyond signage, what else is detailed in the plan to be able to kind of combat the needs of those two different groups?
I think with any activity, it's very much a monitoring initial start point. So it's an awareness initially, and then it's monitoring if there are any conflict or any flashpoints. There hasn't been any incidents here. We have had incidents elsewhere in the borough where there's been an isolated incident, and then when we've reviewed that, whether that be an incident or an accident, we then adjust the risk assessment, review the control measures, and then make an informed decision whether we introduce anything different at that time. With this particular area, as I said, there hasn't been any incidents at this stage, but we will continue to monitor that as we go forward.
Councillor Martin.
I seem to recall it was the late Cameron Beard that brought this forward, if memory serves me right, a couple of years back. And actually one of the reasons for doing so was that it discouraged people from loading their horses into horse boxes and travelling throughout the borough to get somewhere to meet up and ride their horses together. It might not be being particularly well used at this point of the year, but come the summer months, no doubt it will be better used. It's not costing us anything. I think it's a no-brainer. Let's carry on.
I think we may as well move to the vote then. Once I have a proposer and seconder. Councillor Braun and Councillor Shield were the first two hands I saw. Sorry, Dolly. Those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 7 is Iwade Cemetery regulations, and Jay will be introducing this too.
Thank you, Chair. The report this evening is regarding Iwade Cemetery. There is one recommendation, and that is that the committee designates that the current used areas, the current plotted area and the designated children plot is outside of the lawn requirements, but the remainder of the cemetery remains as lawn only. The purpose of the report is to update the committee on the ongoing situation we have at Iwade Cemetery and to seek agreement on the way forward. The cemetery opened in 2021 and was classified under cemetery regulations as a lawn plot cemetery at the time. Unfortunately, a number of initial burials at Iwade families appear not to have been told that the lawn regulations were in place by the funeral directors, and when approached to remove items which they had placed on their plots, a number of families have refused to do that and have stated that they were not advised that it was a lawn only plot at the time. You may recall the issue would reach local media attention, including ITV Meridian News last year. Following that report and ongoing communication, we, myself and a colleague, had an initial meeting in July of last year with a representative of a number of the families. We met on site to discuss the issue and talked through some of the challenges and possible solutions we could have going forward. A follow-up meeting took place in October of last year, and we talked about a number of specific options at that time, and each of those options were explored with the family representation at that meeting. Designated the current plot area, children's plot, is what we're looking at, and that's been identified on Appendix 1 for you. You'll see the orange triangle shape is the main plotted area, and then the rectangle shape to the left as you look is the children's plot. The triangle plot is currently full, and the children's plot have a number of, I think it's 12 to 13 plots in place at this stage. The mitigation and recent actions, we've put in additional signage. We have made significant changes to the funeral director's processes, and we now have a system in place where families at point of inquiry are asked to sign to confirm that they have received and understood the regulations, which we feel will enable us to offer the remainder of the site as lawn only. There are some alternative options. The first one is to hold the current line, and that is that we would then go back to the families and ask them to revert to the lawn plot. This will result in a number of sensitive and emotionally charged meetings. It's fair to say the two meetings I've attended were understandably emotional for obvious reasons and quite difficult. Officers would lead this, but a number of the families have requested that if this option is taken, that they would like to meet councillors who are making those decisions so they can understand their views. The second option we've looked at is to invoke an area of 1.4 by 1 metres, and that's directly in front of the headstone. And the reason for this is to allow some memorial items to be laid at the headstone end, but also half of the plot to be laid to lawn. At the meeting, it was clear that several families that were present would not be happy with this option, but we believed at the time that that would be a compromise that a number of families would be able to accept. What I would say that subsequent to that meeting, a number of the families came back to us to say that they had reflected on that as an option and decided that they weren't happy with that at all. The third option there is to revert the cemetery to allow planting across the whole of the plot without any curbstones. This would result in an estimated cost uplift of approximately £2,300. Consultation, as I mentioned earlier, has taken place. 2 site meetings with representatives of 6 of the families, but also ongoing correspondence. There has been a slight hold on that exchange subject to this meeting this evening, and then we will re-engage with the families once we've had the decision this evening. I'll pause there, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Braun.
I have one thing that I'd like to say, and then I do have a few questions. Regarding option 4.1, I have visited the site. My stepdad is buried there. And I wanted to raise some issues I have with this report. Under the consultation, do you think that at any point there would have been a sampling bias based on the fact that families who were in agreement with the initial policy would not have contacted you, would not have signed the petition, would not have watched the ITV Meridian news story, and therefore would not have been notified by the group representatives who were opposed to the policy and would not have been able to have a part of the consultation?
Potentially, yes, that could have been the case, of course. I think we felt that we would reach out to groups that had already been in contact with us and actively encourage them to speak to a wider group of families. We did have a batch of letters that were sent out to each of the families around the specific situation, and we had limited response to that correspondence. So therefore we felt we would liaise with the group that had put themselves forward to talk to us about it.
Okay, I understand that. Some other issues that I have. Legal ramifications are listed in this report for if the policy isn't changed. But do you not think that holding the line, changing the policy would cause the exact same issue for families that support the initial policy, and the same issues would arise with them?
Yes, the comments around the legal were based upon some of the discussions we had with the families on site around their personal view that they would seek legal action. On the reverse, though, we have suggested that within the designated area, those families that wish to still remain with a lawn plot, that could be facilitated within that designated area. So we would liaise, post this meeting, would liaise with each family individually about their wishes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark.
My wife passed away 6 years ago, and she's laid to rest in Iwade Cemetery. I've never had any information asking me to attend any meeting. I didn't see the television programme. I'm completely in the dark over it. So I'd feel very aggrieved if you're going to say to me, you can't do anything there anymore. I'll be happy to have a headstone and grass around it. That'd be perfectly acceptable to me, but I've got 2 plots. One's for my wife, when she lays to rest in it, and then one's going to be for me when it's my time. So I'd like to have a bit more information then.
I think it's disappointing to hear that you've not received any information as part of that correspondence, and I think as the report suggests, there has been clearly a breakdown at the front end of the process when Iwade opened, which we're looking to ensure we address going forward. As I've just mentioned, once we have a direction of travel following this evening, we will then engage with each individual family about, one, what the decision is, but also how that affects those as an individual family and what that means. So I would be confident that, subject to the decision this evening, that we will be in direct contact with you.
Councillor Vowles.
So I lost my dad within the last 6 months, so I find it hard to talk about death. So I'm just going to breathe and we're going to talk about it. This is all a bit of a mess, really, isn't it? It's really inhumane to suggest reverting to lawn plot for those that are already buried. It's quite disturbing. Should let them rest, in peace. Don't disturb the spirits. Seems to me like somebody hasn't been doing their job, not overseeing matters. It's a breakdown in communication.
I agree. Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more with what Councillor Vowles just said. I mean, the families actually make a contract with us, presumably, when they take a plot. They do it. Is the contract with us?
No, the contract's directly with the funeral director. And when Wade originally opened, the view was that the funeral directors would inform each of those families that it was a lawn-only plot, because that was the regulations at the time. Clearly, there was a breakdown at that stage, which we've retrospectively discovered because of the delay in the plot settling prior to being turfed.
Okay, but if I suppose it's immaterial, because I think what Councillor Vowles said is absolutely right. There's been a cock-up, and I think it's a massive cock-up, and it affects the people that we would want least to affect. And I just think that we should, as you said, let things stay as they are for those that are already interred and their families, and just ensure that we get the process right moving forward. And I'd certainly support that recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shield.
Yeah, it is a very delicate subject, and one of my other jobs, many of them, is leading funerals. It's a time when families are grieving. You don't always make a rash decision, and to be fair, half the time when somebody's talking to you, you're not listening. I really don't see how we as a council can sit there and say to those relatives, well, we're just going to move your plot up a little bit, shovel your stuff up the top, we'll throw a bit of turf down the bottom. It can't happen. It really cannot happen. But equally, can we then say to the other people that will be laid to rest in coming years, and if they've already got plots, that actually one plot can have this, one plot can't have that? Because at that time in their life, family members are not really thinking straight. They're going to agree to a plot, see the rest of the cemetery with bits by the side of them, and then theirs would be grass. I don't think we as a council could decide that for them.
To clarify, I think Jay mentioned it in his introduction, bereaved family members now will be given a form to sign to say that they understand the regulations, because I mean the other remaining option is to leave the entire cemetery to be a non-lawn plot cemetery, and I think what we've got on the table here is the best option. Lots of hands going up now. I'll let you come back first, Councillor Shield.
Thank you. I've arranged several family funerals myself, and for all I know, I could have signed to give them £1 million, because I would not have an absolute clue what I signed and what I did in those moments, because the funeral director sits there, waffles through, you choose songs, you go through the heartache, you're bawling your eyes out. I wouldn't know whether they were talking about grass, not grass, green grass or red grass. All I was concerned about in that moment was getting the funeral service exactly right and laying them to rest at peace. Not whether there was grass or not grass. So yes, we may be going forward with a policy that they're signing. Are they going to realise that if they've visited the cemetery or know of the area and see something, that's what they expect?
Did you want to come back on that, Jay? Or? You don't have to.
Everything I'm listening to is exactly where we thought we would be as a part of the discussion. I think it's a very difficult, very emotional, very emotive process. I take on board the comments about a clear breakdown in communication at the start point, and I think there's, without doubt, a position where we've inherited that and we've tried to make the best of where we're at. And I think the options that we've explored have come internally from officers, but also from family members that have engaged with us. I take on board the comments around point of contact, the emotional situation we're all in at that time, and it is very difficult. And I think we need to try and get to a situation where we can ensure that this won't happen going forward. It is very difficult to change the past, but I think we can come up potentially through some of the alternative options, and the recommendation this evening is to at least come up with a compromise at the location for those that have unfortunately been miscommunicated or misunderstood, whichever it may be in the past.
Councillor Braun.
Now, obviously, as a person, my preferred outcome would be 4.1. But as a councillor, I think what needs to be considered regarding the current proposal on making them sign something, I'm sure there could be a reasonable argument by any person who is a lawyer that that contract was signed under stress and therefore means nothing. I think the only thing that makes sense to the council would be either go for they're all turfed over and set a red line on that, or none of them are turfed over unless requested to be.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I think it's unfortunate that the council have been put in this position. I'd like to know firstly who made the decision at the very onset that it was going to be a grassed over cemetery only. And also, my parents passed away 10 years apart, and I would be very aggrieved. I would want them buried in the same cemetery at the very least. And if I had laid my dad to rest, and then 10 years later laid my mum to rest and was told, well, yeah, your dad can have this, and he can have the ornaments, and he can have the headstone, but your mum can't, I would feel, really hard done by. And also, I only attend one gravestone, and that brings a lot of peace to myself and children and great-grandchildren, the person who's laid to rest. The great-grandchildren who've never met her still write her letters and draw her pictures and put them on her grave. Going to visit her grave and lay flowers and ornaments and what have you does bring a lot of people peace, and I think it's very difficult to say to one group, yes, you can, and the other group, but no, you can't. Thank you.
I'll just add at this point that there are, since the new regulations have been in place and people have been asked to sign to confirm that they understand the rules, there has been a drop in bookings. Sounds like a crass word to use, but a drop in people taking up places at this cemetery because of that very reason, that people are not as attracted to a cemetery where it's just a lawn plot. But nevertheless, I think what we've got here as the proposal is the best way to go to try and acknowledge the failures of the policy up until this point and move forward with a kind of a policy that helps keep the remainder as a lawn plot. Councillor Martin.
It's very difficult to take emotion out of a topic like this, but we sort of have to an extent. Now, the officers weren't the ones signing people's contracts up on day one, but they're the ones that are, at this point in time, costing money, having to deal with the problem. The recommendation on the table is £400 a year. The recommendation that was rejected at 4.3 is £2,300 a year. We have probably spent more than that of Jay's time dealing with this year. We will probably spend more than that if we do have them separated and say those that have new ones are going to be lawn only, those that have already got stuff on them can keep stuff on them. Dealing with disputes further down the road in officer time. A few weeks back, I think it was last week in fact, it was pretty quick in this chamber for people to find £38,000. I think we can find £2,300 per year in the budget, if that's logical. And as I say, separating the emotion from it, that would be the rational decision to make to prevent further spending that we don't need to spend further down the road.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Okay, I'm just going to take a few more comments first and then we'll consider that suggestion. Councillor Clark, you raised your hand again?
Sorry. My children and grandchildren will be very, very unhappy if anything was done at all to my wife's laid to rest in place. Nobody ever told me anything, I can categorically tell you that. I wouldn't have come here today if I'd have known that was on the table, because it's brought my wife's death right in my face again. I had to deal with her death. I was there holding her hand. And it's just brought me right back into it again.
Yeah.
I've had 7 years of grieving, now it's brought it all back into my chest again.
Sorry.
Chair, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but can we not have a couple of minutes recess, because that feels that at least one councillor here needs a bit of a break during this discussion potentially. Sorry to bring it up. I know it's probably not the right way to do it. Apologies.
No, that's fine. I was just wondering how to deal with that myself. Let's have a 5-minute recess and everyone can stretch their legs and have a comfort break if need be, and we'll reconvene at 8:55. Order. Very good. Before we had our short break, Councillor Worcester was actually next in line to speak. Would you like to say something, Councillor Worcester?
Yes, please, Chair. Really difficult situation, and to take Councillor Martin's point of removing a little bit of the emotion out of the conversation, which is very difficult to do, my concern is I would like to be reassured that we're never going to find ourselves in this position again, where, for instance, we are responsible for the maintenance of that area. And it seems very odd to me that we've got in this situation where it wasn't reported back that something was obviously going awry at a much earlier stage than it has actually been pulled up. So I'm pleased to see that we have potentially taken steps to reinforce our procedures. But I think going forwards, we need to provide some sort of closure, because all of this time that this conversation is rumbling on, none of those families can really have the peace of mind that they can start to move on a little bit. And I want to be reassured at the end of this conversation that we've either absolutely made a decision based on the recommendation, but also that as a committee we're making sure that we're taking appropriate accountability for ourselves as to how we've got here and how we make sure that we don't end up back in this sort of situation again. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a question for Jay. Previously, when we've spoken about, I think it was management of closed churchyards, we spoke about, I raised the point of getting in touch with kind of leaders from the traveller community to like speak about how important funeral rights are to them as a protected group of people. Is that something that we've done in relation to this particular project? Has that impacted members of that community? Just because I'm very conscious that under the Equality Act they're a protected group.
There hasn't been a direct contact in that formal sense, no. What I would say is that there has been some representation within the family group. As part of that small group, the representative group of the families, then that particular group has been represented.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Having had residents request it, can we make this a recorded vote, please?
I'm happy to do that. Slows things down a bit. Sorry, Paul and Sarah. Councillor Braun.
I was just going to touch on the question from Councillor Perkin, and Jay did answer it, but I do know that there is a traveller family that have visited the site.
Councillor Perkin.
I think Councillor Martin said that we should look at 4.3. I'm happy to second that as a proposal from the floor.
I believe Councillor Shield has already seconded.
Apologies, Councillor
And
Shield.
I was just about to come back to that. Councillor Martin.
If I give it a slight amendment after conversation with colleagues, if we can have 4.3 with 3.2 written immediately after it, so that those that currently have plots which they wish to be turfed aren't forced to go the other way, and equally people that don't want it turfed aren't forced to go that way. I think we're on the right track.
Jay's nodded, so I guess that should be...
Yes, I think even with the initial recommendation, that was one of the options for that initial group, so therefore I don't see that being an issue.
Great. So to try and put that across as a proposal from Councillor Martin, we will revert the cemetery to allow planting across the whole of the plot, but no curbstones. this would have an blah blah blah. This amount will increase annually, and individual plots within the designated area that wish to continue with lawn will be turfed at the appropriate time. That proposal is from Councillor Martin, second by Councillor Shield. Those in favour of that, did you want to speak before the vote, Councillor Whiting?
Very quick one, Chair, if I may. Thank you. I'll be voting for this, for what's being proposed. I think it's the right thing to do. There is, of course, the procedural issue of we don't have the budget for this, so we do have to refer it.
We'll come on to that if it passes.
Does that form part of this resolution, that it forms a recommendation to P&R? I don't know. Perhaps
that's a very good point. Actually, I was gonna cross that bridge when we came to it, but given that it is a bridge that we will have to cross if we come to it, I will add that now. That we, as well as the amended proposal on the table, there will be a second recommendation beneath that the item is referred to P&R for the budget ramifications to be approved. Okay, and I'm guessing you're happy with that, Councillors Martin and Shield? Great. Thank you. So, could I have the recorded vote sheets? So will you substitute slowing things down? Sorry. I'll let you off. Yeah. Councillor Clark is absent. Councillor Ben Martin. Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, 4.
Councillor Jackson.
4.
Councillor Lehman, 4. Councillor Miller. 4. Councillor Whiting.
4.
Councillor Palmer.
4.
Councillor Shield.
4.
Councillor Speed.
4.
Councillor Paul Stephen.
4.
Councillor Sarah Stephen.
4.
Councillor Vowles.
4.
Councillor Braun.
4.
Councillor Worcester.
4.
Thank you. That was unanimous. And we've just got one further item to cover, which is the forward plan. Item 8. Unless Councillor Whiting's making a face at me and I'm thinking maybe we're not finished with agenda item 7.
I found it, thank you.
Good. Yes, the forward plan, I will just add that this is incomplete. I did ask for the review of the barbecue ban, which we agreed at the last meeting to be added to this, but it hasn't made its way on there yet. But that is on the forward plan, even though it's not on this page in the agenda. And does anyone have any other comments on the forward plan? No? Oh, Councillor Perkin.
I'm sorry. So, I, as a member of the opposition, it would be super helpful if there was slightly more detail to the forward plan, so that, you know, when things are expected to be published, when there's expected to be a draft. I think that in the absence of a scrutiny committee at the council, it is helpful to be able to know fairly far in advance what's coming forward, when the draft's going to be due, so that adequate scrutiny can be done in the committee when it comes to the committee. So it would just be helpful if the administration would have a ponder about that.
Absolutely. And following the LGA peer review earlier in the week, I've already started conversations with Martin on the fact that we're going to be working on a service delivery plan very soon, and also outside of that, making this a lot more robust. Thank you. Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a plea I've been making all over the place is that the forward plan contains all of those things that are going to have a budgetary implication, so that can feed into the budget discussion, so we don't have the sort of debacle we had at the last full council, setting budgets before policies agreed. So it's nice to get the policy agreed here first before we put a budget request in for next year's budget, if that makes sense. So, and policy changes will have a budgetary impact. So I think it's just really important that the service committees have their shopping list of what they want to spend next year ready to put into P&R before the budget is put together.
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't fully involved in the parking review myself, but my understanding was that the cross-party parking policy working group was doing all that work prior to the budget, and so that everyone would know what was coming. But that aside, I agree that the forward plans could be more robust. Thank you, and I will call the meeting to a close before anyone else raises their hand at 21:08.